Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of Comparative Literature in Germany. But right now I'm in the Netherlands to film this video about one of my new favorite novels, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, written in 1926 and published in 1927 in the Hogarth Press, which was the publishing house that Virginia Woolf founded together with her husband Leonard Woolf. The Lighthouse is one of the most famous novels of the literary movement of Modernism, which emerged in the early 20th century. And I want to talk about this novel today to give you an impression of what literary modernism can look like, how the author Virginia Woolf uses her narrative techniques and the structure of the novel, and how this changes and how this differs from novels and classic literature that you've been reading before from the 19th century. And I'm coming to this lighthouse because it is a good symbol of what the novel is actually about. So at first I want to give you a quick overview of the story today. What are we dealing with? Where are we at? And how is the novel structured? I will also give you some examples and some quotes to show you how the language is used and how this language differs a lot from what we know from before, as Virginia Woolf makes use of different narrative techniques and also ideas such as the stream of consciousness, which you cannot really find earlier in the 19th century. And after that, I also want to talk about the symbols that she uses in the novel, such as the lighthouse, a painting, and the sea itself. And I also want to talk a little bit about literary modernism in general and how you can find that in the novel. And in the end, I also want to give you a short impression of how Virginia Woolf reflected her writing process in her diary, because this is quite interesting to read, and also tell you a little bit about how her husband reacted to the novel. And in the very end, I will give you my opinion of the novel. And I hope you stay tuned and enjoy the video. The novel is structured in 3 parts that are called: first, the window; the second, time passes; and the third, the lighthouse. And the first part, the window, is the longest one. We follow the family Ramsay to their summer home in the Hebrides, which is a group of islands located at the Isle of Skye. And they always come there together with their 8 children and also some family friends that they invite over to stay with them over the summer, to spend time at the beach or just to relax, to discuss philosophy, politics, whatever they're interested in, or even to do some artistic activities. So one of the friends they invite is Lily Briscoe. He is a young writer who struggles with her abilities and her self-worth. But this changes throughout the novel, as you can see when I talk longer about it. Then you also have Charles Tansley, who is probably the most unlikable character in the whole novel. He is a young man who is an aspiring philosopher and a student of Mr. Ramsay, who is a philosopher himself, and he's always talking about how he's going to write his dissertation, but you doubt whether he really does it, and he wants everyone to talk about him and how he is the best of the best, which is really annoying. Then you also have William Banks, who is a former botanist and a very friendly older character, who is a good friend of the family and also becomes a very good friend of Lily Briscoe. You also have Minta and Paul, who become a couple, but that's just a side story, and that is not as interesting, and also some other characters that I won't mention in particular because they are not so relevant. So the novel starts with this passage in the window. It is a very long passage, the first part of the novel, and it basically tells the everyday life of the family in the summer home. So it changes from the perspective of one person to another through the narrative, but you don't really have a lot of action, you don't have a lot of plot. It's basically how the characters tell their thoughts, and you just flow through the thoughts from one character to another, and sometimes you don't even realize that the perspective has changed. And it starts out with the little boy 6-year-old James, the youngest son of the family, who asks his parents whether they can finally go to the lighthouse, because he dreams of going to this lighthouse, to visiting this beautiful place. But the parents always seem to have a different kind of excuse of why they cannot go to the lighthouse. Most of the time they refer to the weather, because it's too wet, it's too stormy, it's too dangerous to go out. So little James cuts out all these pieces from magazines and makes pictures of that, and that's how he keeps himself busy while dreaming of going to this lighthouse. And the novel starts right in the middle of a scene in medias res, when Mrs. Ramsay says, "Yes, of course, it is fine tomorrow," said Mrs. Ramsay, "but you will have to be up with the lark," she added. And after that, there's a discussion between her and her husband, fighting about whether they can actually go to the lighthouse, because the husband says he doubts whether they can really go, and his word is always the truth, as Virginia Woolf describes, because he cannot say anything else. And this is how they actually start to fight a little bit, because both of them are characters with rather strong opinions, like the patriarch and the matriarch of the family, if you will. Both of them have a lot of influence also around their friends, and they are like the most important characters of the novel in a way, because everything revolves around them. But this switches throughout the novel. So in the beginning you have Mrs. Ramsay, and Mrs. Ramsay is like in the very middle of this, like the center of attention. Everyone adores her. She's very beautiful and she's very nurturing and empathetic. She cares for everybody, and even the other male characters also adore her and have a thing for her, and they also express that in their thoughts. And she also is a little bit selfish, and she wants everyone to like her and to think that she's the most important person around, because she is so nurturing and so important to care for everybody. Then you have Mr. Ramsay, who seems often a little bit cold, and like his opinion is the only one that matters. But you also realize throughout the novel that this is not really the case, that he also needs a lot of validation, and he needs people to tell him that everything's fine and that he's a good man, and he needs a lot of reassurance, and that even becomes a problem in the end. But these are the most important characters. Then you have this young woman, Lily Briscoe, and she becomes more and more important, because her perspective becomes the most important one in the very end of the novel. So in this first passage at the window, most of the time the setting's just within the house or around the house. Lily Briscoe is trying to paint a picture, and she really struggles because she cannot really capture what she sees. She wants to paint Mrs. Ramsay, she wants to paint the house, the whole scene, but she really doubts her own abilities. And that is really difficult, because there's one quote that really expresses that quite well, is this one. She could see it all so clearly, so commandingly when she looked. It was when she took her brush in hand that the whole thing changed. It was in that moment's flight between the picture and her canvas that the demons sat on her, who often brought her to the verge of tears, and made this passage from conception to work as dreadful as any down a dark passage for a child. Such she often felt herself, struggling against terrific odds to maintain her courage, to say, "But this is what I see, this is what I see," and so to clasp some miserable remnant of her vision to her breast, which 1,000 forces did her best to pluck from her. So, as you can see in this quote, she really struggles to take up the courage to just take the brush and paint what she sees. So her perspective, what she sees in front of her, and not needing the validation of others to just paint what she really wants to paint. And this capturing of what is around you, and how you can make sense of your surroundings and your own opinions and the passage of time, and also the relationships you've got, that is a very important theme in the novel. So that is something that you will see throughout, and Lily Briscoe is the character in which you can feel these struggles most intensely. So this is the first passage. They just tells how the different characters go about their everyday life in the summer home, what they experience, how they go for walks and try to paint this picture, and then they also have a big family dinner where they have fights and discussions, and you feel like you're in the middle of the scene, really. Although it's not really so much plot and not so much dialogue, but rather the thoughts of the characters, which really gives a quite intense view of everything, and you feel like you're really getting into the heads of the people. And this is something that is rather new with this literary movement of modernism, because before you often didn't really have a chance to get into the characters' heads unless they were really expressing their own thoughts and really talking. This is a new device that is really important for this movement of the literary modernism. And then you have the second passage, which is actually my favorite passage. And the second passage is functions like a bridge between the first and the third. It is telling how things have changed. So now you always have the very important plot elements in the brackets, and one of these important elements is that Mrs. Ramsay dies, and after 10 years they only return to the island, the Isle of Skye, because in between World War I is going on, the Great War, and they cannot come to the summer home. And they've got Mrs. McNabb, who is taking care of the house and tries to maintain everything as it was before, but it gets increasingly difficult over the course of the years. Nobody's there, storms ravage around, darkness, water. It's really a difficult time, and also difficult for her to just keep up with everything. And so in this second passage, time passes. It just really reflects very well the difficulties of that time, of this dark time in between, when they cannot visit the family home and it is abandoned in a way, and they have to leave things in the past but also build a new future. And this bridge, Virginia Woolf described the whole structure of the novel as like an H form. So first you have the window, then you have the time passes section, and then you have the third, the lighthouse section. And this time passes section is very interesting because from the tone and the style it differs a lot. So from the middle section of time passes, it is very interesting because there's not really any character around, and Virginia Woolf manages to tell what's going on even though there's no person around. And this is also something rather new. Before, you always had people telling what's going on, and she describes it like this, for example. So with the house empty and the doors locked and the mattresses rolled round, those stray heirs, advance guards of great armies, blustered in, brushed bare boards, nibbled and fanned, met nothing in bedroom or drawing room that wholly resisted them, but only hangings that flapped, wood that creaked, the bare legs of tables, saucepans and china already furred, tarnished, cracked. What people had shed and left, a pair of shoes, a shooting cap, some faded skirts and coats and wardrobes. Those alone kept the human shape, and in the emptiness indicated how once they were filled and animated, how once hands were busy with hooks and buttons, how once the looking glass held a face, had held a world hollowed out, in which a figure turned, a hand flashed, the door opened, in came children, rushing and tumbling, and went out again. So this is from chapter 4 of the passage, The Time Passes. And what I think is really interesting, that it seems like it is told by the perspective of the house, even, because it is a very detailed description of all the elements in the house, and also in a way what the house can see, you know, children coming in and people looking into the looking glasses and saucepans being used and stuff like that. So it's like a very much of an everyday scene, but from another perspective than you're used to, and that is very powerful. And it is also very poetic, very beautiful use of language here. So this passage is very, very much the most artistic one of the three. And the final passage, that is called The Lighthouse, James and his sister Cam go together on a ship with her father to the lighthouse finally. So after 10 years that he has been needing to wait to go to this lighthouse, they actually come across it. It is a very interesting passage because it resembles the first one, the window, and the whole tone is more of the like, but the perspectives have switched as Mrs. Ramsay has been dying by now, and everything is a little bit more gloomy, and the characters are thinking a lot more. They are more pensive and more like busy with themselves, but they also realize a lot about each other. So they have a different and clearer vision and picture of each other in their heads. So, for example, James realizes that he does not have to be as afraid of his father as he always has been when he was a child, and also that the lighthouse is not really what he has expected, but still he's very glad that he could go there once by now. And then you also see Lily Briscoe, who has really been going through a lot of change, and now she's able to finish her painting in the very end, and she's able to really just see that her own perspective is just one out of many, and it is very difficult to have a clear vision of anything because life is so complex, and it is okay that she only has her own perspective of things. And there's this very beautiful quote from her that I wanted to read to you that says, "What is the meaning of life? That was all, a simple question, one that tended to close in on one with years. The great revelation had never come. The great revelation perhaps never did come. Instead, there were little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck unexpectedly in the dark. Here was one." And I really like that because it just shows how meaning in life is fluid and it changes, and things that are important to us change. And I think that is one of the most important messages of the whole novel. And it is very beautifully shown by this image of the lighthouse that little James really was desperate to go to. And when he actually gets there, he sees that it's not really as beautiful and wonderful as he was thinking, but it's still nice to be there. And things you dream of change, and the vision that you've got of the things and the perspective also changes. And this is the meaning of time and life in the end. Okay, so after I finished talking about what the novel is about, I also want to talk about the symbols that are used within the novel. The first symbol would be the lighthouse, as you can guess from the title and from what the novel is about. What is very nice to see is that it means something different to each character that you will realize when reading the novel. It is especially beautifully illustrated through the perspective of James Ramsay, the little boy in the beginning who's been dreaming of the lighthouse, and sees that his perspective on the lighthouse changes when he really stands in front of it, and he's also grown older. And what is really nice, I also read about that a lot, that it can symbolize that, like the lighthouse can symbolize that not everything is always the same. Things change, perspectives change, just as I've been saying before as well. And at the same time, it's this beautiful tower, this lighthouse standing at the shore and also still standing there. So like a thing that's maintaining the passage of time in a way as well. And that is really nice. So it's also one thing. Yeah. So then you've also got Lily's painting, which is representation of the struggles of women against gender roles, because, for example, Charles Stanley always tells her that women can't write, women can't paint, women can't do art. And she really struggles with that because she feels like she competes with men in a way, and she also has to defend herself and she has to prove herself as a woman and as an artist in the same time. And you feel like, as I've been reading this quote to you and also from very many different passages, you can see that she really struggles with creating that artwork. So only when she comes clear with her own vision and sees that it is okay that she paints the way she sees things, and she also realizes what her vision of the house and the Ramsay family actually is and how she really sees them, she can really finish that painting. And that is also a very important aspect of the whole novel. And then you've also got the Ramsay house as a very important aspect of the whole novel, because you see that this is like the main setting where most of the novel is actually set. And everything's happening there, people meeting, people falling in love, people fighting, people trying to come to terms with their own life and their struggles. And this is basically the most important aspect. Until the end, they switch to the outside and to the lighthouse, and they just get out of the house. So the meaning of the house is not as important anymore because they just lived in it as long as it was necessarily in a way. And then you also have the symbol of the sea in a way as something that is ever-changing, ever-moving, everlasting. So now I want to talk a little bit about the literary movement of modernism and why the novel of Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse, is such a good example of this movement. So what makes the movement so special is that it breaks with many of the traditions that you know from the 19th century of storytelling and narrative techniques. Everything is more fragmented. The whole narrative is not like a constant flow, but it's rather a kind of like a non-linear and more complex, structured way of telling a story. So you've got more perspectives of different characters. You've got different kinds of perspectives. It's not like this very linear one protagonist, one character telling a story from their perspective. It is rather different perspectives, even as you've seen into The Lighthouse, when the perspective of the house is suddenly taken up, and it just changes in that way a lot. So modernists really tried to break with the conventions they knew from the 19th century, from Victorianism, and this was also influenced by just a new time coming. You know, like the Industrial Revolution brought many changes to the work cultures, to the everyday lives, what was important to people, and also like the whole society and societal shifts. And then also World War I was happening, and this also was like bringing many ruptures and changes to people's lives, and also the importance of things changed. And this is also what many writers reflected upon. And modernist writers really tried also to emphasize the subjectivity of things and the constant changes, and this is very well exhibited in To the Lighthouse, because the perspectives of the different single characters are more important than the plot, or just like the one truth telling one story from one perspective. So that's what you can really see very well in that novel. You also have this narrative technique of stream of consciousness, where you just flow through the thoughts of a person from one thing to another. It's not clear sections, clear changes, so one person can think of one character and then think about what she has to do for housework, and then how she goes on vacation, for example. So it just changes from the fluidity of thoughts, you know, that's depicted very well through the stream of consciousness. And I think many people tend to find that very annoying to read, because you really have to immerse yourself in the thoughts of a person, but you can also get to know the character so much better. So that's what I really like personally. Then you also have an open-endedness. You don't really know how the novels end or what happens to the characters, which is also rather new. And I think the most important thing is really just this experimentation with language and form, and just breaking free from the traditional structures that people knew and people used all the time. So you have so many new ways of storytelling. Think of James Joyce writing Ulysses. Think of the movement of the Imagism, where people were writing poems in new styles, such as Ezra Pound, and also Emily Dickinson. There's so many different writers who have had such a great influence on this whole modernist movement. Henry James, you can think of many different ones, but Virginia Woolf is definitely one of the major figures of modernism as well. And I think this is like best depicted actually in the novel To the Lighthouse. Finally, I want to give you a short impression of the writing process of To the Lighthouse that Virginia Woolf has been starting in the year 1926. And on Tuesday, February 23rd, she wrote, "I'm blown like an old flag by my novel. This is one is To the Lighthouse. I think it is worth saying for my own interest that at last, after that battle, Jacob's room, that agony, all agony but the end, Mrs. Dalloway, I am now writing as fast and freely as I have written in the whole of my life. More so, 20 times more so than any novel yet. I think this is the proof that I was on the right path, and that what fruits hang in my soul is to be reached there. And then on Friday, April 30th, she writes, yesterday I finished the first part of To the Lighthouse, and today began the second. I cannot make it out. Here is the most difficult abstract piece of writing. I have to give an empty house, no people's characters, the passage of time, all eyeless and featureless, with nothing to cling to. Well, I rush at it and at once scatter out 2 pages. Is it nonsense? Is it brilliance? Why am I so flown with words and apparently free to do exactly what I like? When I read a bit, it seems spiritude, needs compressing, but not much else. Compare this dashing fluency with Mrs. Dalloway, save the end. This is not made up, it is the literal fact. And I think just from these 2 examples you could see that Virginia Woolf was really happy with the writing process, and it was really going smoothly and fluently, and more so than in most of the novels that she's writing before. And this is also something that you can realize when you read the novel, because it feels like it's really flowing very smoothly from one passage to the next. And this is also what makes reading it very nice and very easy, to me at least. I want to tell you what her husband Leonard Woolf was thinking of the novel, because he was the first one to read it. And on January 23rd in the year 1927, so almost a year after she's been starting to write the novel, he read it and she writes, well, Leonard has read To the Lighthouse and said it is much my best book and it is a masterpiece. He said this without me asking. I came back from Knoll and sat without asking him. He calls it entirely new. A psychological poem is his name for it. An improvement upon Dalloway, more interesting. Having won this great relief, my mind dismisses the whole thing as usually, and I forget it until I only wake up and be worried again over proofs, and then when it appears. So this is pretty nice summary, I think. Leonard Woolf was very fond of the writing of Virginia Woolf, and he encouraged her all her life to write more. And this description of To the Lighthouse as a psychological poem is pretty well, I think. I think it suits the novel, because people have told me already to treat Virginia Woolf's writing as poetry more than prose, because you really just have to take your time when reading it, as her prose is really poetic, and it makes sense to treat it as a psychological poem. So that's what I can recommend to you, and this is also the way you will probably enjoy it most. Just take your time, especially with the second passage, which is also the shortest one, the section Time Passes, and just immerse yourself in this whole setting. Imagine yourself being at the sea yourself and wishing to go to the lighthouse and just getting into the characters. And I think this way you can really understand the novel a lot better than just trying to get through it and to just... If you want to read Virginia Woolf, you should better get started with something else. I think I always recommend, for a novel, I recommend Mrs. Dalloway to people, and for her non-fiction writing, I would recommend A Room of One's Own, because this is one of her most beautiful non-fiction pieces, which also has a very important message, which is a woman has to have a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And this novel is, for me, also like my, I think, 3rd novel or 4th novel that I'm reading of her. I will also maybe talk about the others in the future, but it is also the most poetic one, and I loved reading it. So if you can find the time and also the willingness to just really muse over the writing and to just think about it and take it in, and also like put the book aside and take it up again in the future, then it's a good read. That's what I want to finish the video with. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been just a rather short impression of the novel, just a few quotes, just a little bit of overview and background, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And the sound of the waves in the background, I hope it was not too windy. I really enjoyed filming it, and I can really recommend reading the novel. If you have any questions, just leave them below in the comments. If you want me to do another video on Virginia Woolf, her life, her writing, anything in particular, just please also leave it down below in the comments if you have. And I would like to just finish the video here, and I think I will just see you in my next video. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to the channel. Bye bye.